Welcome to A Broader View. This is where we discuss some of the most pressing topics behind the headlines. I'm your host, Kenny Cooper. It's election season, so today we're having a conversation that will take us from the National Democratic debate stage to Philadelphia's municipal elections. Please meet my co-host.
Hi, my name is Tangine Twinkle. With my guest, we'll talk about Philadelphia's upcoming mayoral election, which is on November 5th, voter outreach efforts, and policy that lawmakers are debating.
And with my guest, we'll have a discussion about the most recent Democratic presidential debate and the impeachment inquiry. So join us as we take a broader view. We are approaching primary season as the race to 2020 continues. CNN and the New York Times managed to squeeze a dozen Democratic hopefuls on stage last week for a 3-hour debate. Despite the length, many questions were left unanswered. And beyond unanswered questions, the specter of impeachment cast a large shadow over the debate. Joining me to pick up the pieces is Benjamin Atumunazane. Benjamin is a Temple University senior studying political science and economics. He's the vice president of external affairs for the Temple College Democrats. Also joining us is Temple law professor Craig Green. Among the several courses he teaches are the federal courts and constitutional law. Thank you both for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for
So
having
Benjamin, before we dig into the debate, I'd like to know, what issues do you think will drive you to the polls in 2020?
Oh, climate change, most certainly. It's the generational question that I think we all have to solve. And if we don't, well, we won't be able to vote in future elections.
So what was your analysis of Tuesday's debate?
I thought there were a lot of questions, like you said, left unanswered. I think Bernie Sanders mentioned this early in the debate that he hoped that they would talk about climate change more. I don't think they touched on that enough. And that's the driving issue for me, like I said. It's always great to see them talk about Medicare and mention impeachment. I do think they talked a bit about Trump too much, but what can you expect?
So you mentioned the Medicare question. There was one question that seemed to reoccur over the night, which was pressed towards Senator Elizabeth Warren about, will she raise taxes for the middle class to fund the Medicare plan? What do you make of that?
Well, I'm a really big fan of Senator Warren as well. I do wish that she had just said that she would raise taxes because, if you read the plan, she will. And I think she kind of tiptoed around it. I think she doesn't want to upset a certain part of the population that wouldn't like that. But I think she should just be honest about it if that's her plan.
So once again, the debate lasted 3 hours long, multiple questions on healthcare, a question on Ellen, but only one question focused on impeachment. And as you saw in the very beginning, the candidates were all in unanimous support of the impeachment inquiry. So what do you make of that?
I think it's great that they're all on the same page, but I don't think it should run the debate. I don't think we're going to drive voters to the poll by just talking about Donald Trump. So I think it's great that they focused on the issues and didn't devote too much time to it. Just because in the end of the day, candidates aren't exactly going out to vote. If your strategy is don't vote for the other guy, then I don't think you have a winning strategy.
So Professor Green, if you've been paying attention to any cable news outlet over the past couple of weeks, there's one phrase you've been hearing: constitutional crisis. My question to you is, using your experience as a law professor and former clerk for Merrick Garland, are we in a constitutional crisis?
Well, I think it depends, obviously, because the impeachment inquiry by Congress is the most serious thing they can do. The possibility of throwing out a president democratically elected, at least by the Electoral College, and there's no court supervising that process, really. And so they are doing inquiry. President Trump has stonewalled and denied and rejected requests for information, and that's where the impasse comes from, and that's where the crisis comes to be. We left out in the democracy, we're left to wonder what really happened, what evidence is there available on the Ukrainian incident, as of course earlier there had been about Bob Mueller. And that's the crisis of it all, is that they have a democracy that needs to know, you have houses of Congress that need to know, and a president who refuses to tell.
So take us through the steps of impeachment. What's next? Where do you see the timeline going from here?
Yeah, the timeline is so interesting because I would have assumed that Mitch McConnell in the Senate would promise to do nothing. But actually, he's promised that if there are articles of impeachment, he's going to go forward. The way it happens is the House collects information. Right now they're doing investigation. If they come together with enough information to put together articles of impeachment, charges, sort of like an indictment for reasons that Trump might be impeached, then they would vote on that. And then that would proceed to the Senate, where they would try those charges in public with due process that they arrange or whatever else under Senate rules.
So explain the foundation of this recent impeachment inquiry. What's the legal basis for it?
Right, there are two really important theories anyway. One of them has already been more or less confessed in public, and that's the idea of getting a campaign finance contribution from Ukraine. You can't take things of value, that's the legal term, from foreign nationals. And you can't solicit those kinds of things of value. In the phone call with Ukraine, when Donald Trump asked for them to investigate the son of his rival, to smear his rival, that was a thing of value. He was asking for it. And so that's a campaign finance violation right there. The deeper issue, much more serious issue, is an idea of sort of a quid pro quo, I think is what people talk about. The idea that they held up Ukrainian funds in exchange for that kind of investigation and dirt. Now, if that happened, I think that's incredibly serious. The evidence is sort of falling out. Mick Mulvaney confessed to it this week and then denied his confession. So I think there's a lot of, that's where I think really the evidence has yet to be collected. What really went down between Donald Trump and the Ukrainian in that aid package?
So put yourself in the shoes of Rudy Giuliani, the TV lawyer.
That's scary.
What is Trump's best argument
Yeah.
to shield off the impeachment inquiry?
Yeah, his best argument for sure. Well, first part of it depends on the facts, which we really don't know yet. The investigation's very serious, but it's unclear how much they're going to. But the most important issue that the president has is he argues that foreign policy works this way. Almost all foreign policy is designed to help the presidency, maybe the country, and maybe the president. For example, he gets cooperation with Mexico about border security. That helps his election. That is a thing of value for him. But if he's some sort of negotiated deal where he'll give money in exchange for that, it's not considered to be a campaign finance violation or some abuse of power. The problem here is it's directly at the Bidens and directly against his, what at least it seemed to be, his main political rival. And that's so different from other kinds of international diplomacy and trades and deals and so forth. And that's something I think the United States has really not seen in a long time, if ever. And so I think that's where the argument is, it's just ordinary foreign policy. Yeah, but is it? I think that's what the facts are going to have to show.
So as you said before, it starts as an impeachment inquiry, moves on to impeachment, which is the House's investigation. And if they choose to impeach the president, then it goes towards the Senate to actually remove him.
Correct.
If he's impeached and he isn't removed, Benjamin, where do you see the political ramifications being?
I mean, I think that you're going to see great division within the country, more so than you already do. I see a long-term effect on the fabric of our democracy because at the end of the day, we're upheld by norms, right? I mean, we follow the Constitution and we try to uphold the things that have been sort of laid out for us by the founders. And if we don't do that, as Donald Trump kind of he's broken all the rules, then you kind of see a degradation of the norms of our democracy. And you can't really come back from that. I mean, you see a lot of countries that fall down these steps, and it's very hard to replace those norms and come back to a state of normalcy.
So, Professor Green, talking about political ramifications, the courts have also played a role in this in terms of the House levying subpoenas towards several administration officials. If they fail to comply, what are the legal ramifications?
I think that's it. That's really the uncharted territory in all of this. I think there are a lot of judicial doctrines and cases that suggest that fights between the branches, this sort of constitutional crisis, the courts don't play umpire. The only partial exception to that was the Nixon tapes way back in the day, and there the court was very specific. It was about a criminal investigation, not a congressional investigation, and so that's one of the reasons they let the subpoena go forward. And I think there's just a real question about the so-called executive privilege. How broad is it, and how can it stand up? I mean, there have only been 4 impeachment inquiries, period, in all of U.S. history, so there aren't a lot of precedents around. Of course, in the background of all this, if it ever got to the Supreme Court, President Trump has a lot of friends on that court. And so I think there are real questions about how aggressive they would be in pushing back against a president that's stonewalling.
So what are your thoughts on the recent strategy by Nancy Pelosi to kind of hold off on impeachment till last minute? Do you think that gives Trump the ability to run the shot clock down on the complying to subpoenas, especially from his administration officials?
Well, I think I think all the shot clock images are difficult if you think about removal, and I don't think that's what it's about. I think the idea of trying to find the information that may be usable in sort of the political realm may not. People may care, or they may not care. I think that's an open question. But I think the idea really is to try to keep things moving along, feel like progress is being made, and if at worst, or at least this sort of stonewalling and denial shows the American public who the president is and what he believes in. So I think that even if sort of there isn't judicial enforcement, even if Mitch McConnell will not allow his Republicans to vote for removal, no matter what the facts might show, I think even this process keeps in front of America, one vision of what's at stake. Of course, there are lots of big policy things in climate and Medicare, all sorts of things. But I think also there is this image of norms, as you mentioned, and sort of the presidency and what America stands for. And there are some candidates who want to run on that.
Thank you both for joining me, Benjamin Antimizane and Professor Craig Green, for your analysis. Stay tuned for a broader view. We'll be right back on TUTV.